It's October 25th, 1983. The United States is about to conduct its largest military operation since the Vietnam War. Over 7,000 U.S. troops are prepared to invade Grenada, an island one-tenth the size of Rhode Island with a population of 95,000. You may be asking yourself, why is the U.S. invading? What could a small island nation like Grenada have done to draw the ire of the most powerful military on Earth? Welcome to 20th Century Battles, and in this video, I'm going to answer those questions and more as I give you a comprehensive overview of the US Invasion of Grenada. To understand why the US would invade such a small and seemingly strategically unimportant island, we need to go back to 1979. Grenada was 5 years removed from having gained their independence from Britain when in March of that year, a coup was orchestrated by the New Jewel movement led by Maurice Bishop. The New Jewel movement was a communist movement that aligned with Marxist-Leninist ideals. With the coup successful, Bishop established the People's Revolutionary Government. As part of the takeover, Bishop formed the People's Revolutionary Army and began arming and building up a formidable force. The new government also began construction of a new international airport that had a runway nearly 9,000 feet long. In order to facilitate this military buildup and construction project, the new Grenadian government formed close ties with Cuba and the Soviet Union, both of which were more than willing to support a friendly communist state deep in the U.S. sphere of influence. By 1983, the U.S. began to view the Grenadian military buildup and airfield as a threat to U.S. interests. President Ronald Reagan asserted that the airfield had military purposes. He cited the lack of a Grenadian Air Force, the ability of the airfield to support the largest Soviet aircraft, and the fact that Cuban engineers were heavily involved in the construction of the airport. Maurice Bishop countered these claims by pointing out that the existing airport of Grenada was too small for modern airliners, and that the new airfield would lead to increased tourism to the island and help boost the economy. Inside Grenada, political turmoil began to stir within the People's Revolutionary Government between Maurice Bishop and his Deputy Prime Minister, Bernard Coard. Coard was more hardline than Bishop politically and wanted more power. After failing to secure a power-sharing agreement with Bishop, Coard had him arrested on October 13, 1983. Around this time, other Caribbean nations, including Jamaica, began to request military intervention from the United States. In the days following Bishop's arrest, protests began across Grenada. Bishop was an immensely popular leader, and his removal was deeply unsettling to the people of Grenada. These protests came to a head on October 19th when protesters marched to where Bishop was being held along with other members of his cabinet. Bishop's guards released him, and the protesters began to march on the headquarters of the army. At some point, shooting began, leaving 3 PRA soldiers dead, along with 8 civilians. Maurice Bishop and 7 other prominent supporters of his were arrested. They were all subsequently executed by the PRA. It's unclear who gave the order to execute Bishop, but the leader of the PRA, General Hudson Austin, formed a military council to rule Grenada with himself as chairman. The situation in Grenada had become untenable. Many Caribbean nations began pleading with the United States for a military intervention. The Queen's representative on the island, Governor General Paul Scoon, also made a request for intervention through diplomatic back channels. In less than a week, a U.S. invasion force had been assembled and prepared for Grenada. U.S. planners reportedly planned the entire operation in less than 48 hours. There was additional concern for the hundreds of Americans on the island who were students at St. George's University. The U.S. cited this as one of the reasons for the invasion, as the U.S. government feared possible harm coming to them. Before jumping to the invasion itself, let's break down the opposing forces, starting with the People's Revolutionary Army. By 1983, the People's Revolutionary Army was 1,200 strong and was by far the largest army in the Eastern Caribbean. They were armed and trained by their Soviet and Cuban counterparts. The Grenadians were armed with Soviet small arms and had been equipped with 8 BTR-60 APCs and 2 BRDM-2 armored cars. They had no tanks, and they also didn't have any form of Air Force or Navy. Despite the relatively large size, only 463 PRA regulars, along with almost 260 militiamen, were active on the day of the invasion. In addition to the PRA forces, Grenada was also supplemented by Cuban advisors and armed construction workers that totaled around 784 men. These forces were largely based at the partially completed airfield at Point Salines. On the U.S. side, the American forces totaled around 7,300 men. Notable units that were to play a significant role in the invasion were the 75th Ranger Regiment, the 82nd Airborne Division, Delta Force, and SEAL Team 6. In addition to these troops were also Marines that were to be used in amphibious operations. The Navy also provided a significant task force for the invasion. The aircraft carrier USS Independence was the flagship of the operation, in addition to dozens of other combat vessels and support ships. The Air Force would also be providing significant aerial support for the invasion in the form of close air support operations and transport operations that will be discussed a little bit later. American forces were under the command of Vice Admiral Joseph Metcalf III. His deputy commander was Major General Norman Schwarzkopf, who was still 8 years away from gaining the eternal nickname Stormin' Norman in the Gulf War. The U.S. forces were also supplemented by 350 members of the Caribbean Peace Force. This included 150 soldiers from Jamaica, 50 troops from Barbados, and the remainder were filled out by various nations of the Eastern Caribbean. These troops would act as an occupation and rearguard force to the invasion. Thus, by the evening of October 24th, U.S. forces were in position to undertake their largest combat operation in over 8 years. The invasion was scheduled to begin at 0500 on October 25th. On the evening of October 24th, Navy SEALs from SEAL Team 6 were inserted by sea at various locations for invasion reconnaissance. Unfortunately, little serviceable information was obtained from these operations, and a mishap with one of the insertion teams resulted in the loss of 4 SEALs. The primary objectives for U.S. forces were as follows. Secure Point Salines International Airport so that reinforcements and supplies could be flown in on the airstrip. As part of this stage of the invasion, the secondary objective was to secure the St. George's University campus and the American students located there. On the northeastern coast, Marines were tasked with securing Pearls Airport, which, like Point Salines, could be used to fly in supplies and reinforcements. On the morning of October 25th, Rangers from the 75th Ranger Regiment were loaded onto their C-130s and began heading towards Grenada. The initial plan was for them to perform an air assault by landing their C-130s directly onto the airfield and then disembarking. The plan had to be altered en route when it was found that the airfield was obstructed by construction equipment. The Rangers subsequently had to parachute onto the airfield instead. The Rangers faced moderate resistance from the Cuban and Grenadian defenders. They were successful in eliminating several BTR-60s during the assault. By 10 a.m., the Rangers had succeeded in clearing the airfield, and the first reinforcements began to land at the airport. Around 15:30, the Grenadians attempted a counterattack utilizing 3 of their BTR-60s, but the Rangers were successful in repelling the attack using recoilless rifles and M72 Laws. The Rangers began to spread out and began securing the rest of the area. They were successful in securing the surrender of 100 Cuban defenders who were holding out in a hangar near the airfield. During this time, a patrol got lost while attempting to locate the St. George's campus and was ambushed, resulting in 4 Rangers being killed. The troops did eventually make their way to the campus where they found 140 students. They were then informed that more U.S. students were at a different campus that was 1.5 miles to the north. Further up the coast, Delta Force operators and Rangers conducted 2 raids. One was on Fort Rupert to attempt to capture members of the Grenadian government, and the other was on Richmond Hill Prison to free political prisoners. The assault on Fort Rupert was successful, but the assault on Richmond Hill did not fare well due to faulty U.S. intelligence. Richmond Hill was not suitable for a helicopter insertion and was heavily defended by anti-aircraft guns. One Black Hawk helicopter was shot down during the raid, and numerous other helos took damage that resulted in their passengers being wounded or incapacitated. Around the same time, Navy SEALs were conducting an operation to extract Governor General Paul Scoon, whose life was potentially at risk and who was ultimately going to lead Grenada temporarily after the invasion. The Navy SEALs successfully secured the mansion where Scoon was staying, but a Grenadian counterattack featuring BTR-60s and ground troops surrounded the mansion. The SEALs were trapped with no way out, and help was still hours away from being able to reach them. The trapped SEALs were finally relieved at 10 a.m. on October 26, when Marines advancing from Grand Mall were able to push back the Grenadians that had surrounded the SEALs. The SEALs had successfully held off the counterattack for nearly 24 hours by the time help arrived. While the events in the southwest part of the island were ongoing, Marines were landed by helicopter in the northeast and were able to secure Pearl's airport with minimal resistance. They subsequently began to fan out and secured the surrounding towns and villages and began to head towards St. George's, the capital of Grenada. On the second day of the invasion, soldiers from the 82nd Airborne began to move out to secure more of the surrounding area around Point Salines, as well as make their way to the second campus of St. George's University. During this time, a patrol from the 82nd was ambushed by Cuban forces, resulting in 2 soldiers being killed and 6 others being wounded. As the 82nd advanced, they also secured a large weapons cache with numerous vehicles, dozens of weapons, and thousands of rounds of ammunition. After several other engagements, the majority of Cuban resistance came to an end, with over 600 Cubans being captured. Rangers were finally successful in reaching the second campus of students and were able to evacuate 233 by helicopter. The students then informed them of yet another campus where students were being held that was 2 miles to the south, further highlighting the lack of important pre-planning and intelligence for the entire operation. By the third day, Grenadian resistance had largely collapsed. Marines advancing from Pearl's airport encountered little resistance as they advanced across the island. Despite this, the U.S. suffered from a friendly fire airstrike that wounded 16 and killed 1. They also suffered 3 killed and 4 wounded when 3 helicopters collided while attempting to secure a barracks that turned out to be abandoned. The remaining U.S. students were also evacuated at last. The next several days were spent securing the island, and major combat operations had effectively come to an end. The U.S. had succeeded in removing the People's Revolutionary Government from power in Grenada. They had successfully evacuated the American students on the island. All told, 19 U.S. servicemen were killed in the fighting, and another 116 were wounded. The United States also lost 9 helicopters during the invasion. The Grenadians suffered 45 killed and 358 wounded. 6 of their BTR-60s were destroyed and 2 were captured, while 1 of their BRDM-2 armored cars was destroyed, and the other was also captured and returned to the U.S. Cuba had 24 of their servicemen killed with 59 wounded. 638 were captured and later repatriated home. 24 Grenadian civilians were killed during the fighting. 18 of these happened when an airstrike inadvertently hit a mental hospital. Alright guys, so before I move on to the conclusion of this video, if you felt like you've learned something today, I'd really love for you to hit that like button so this video can spread to other people. So as for now, on to the conclusion. The invasion was immensely popular in the United States, but it did lead to anger from the United Kingdom since Grenada was a Commonwealth nation. President Ronald Reagan was reamed on a phone call with British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher over the invasion. The invasion was instrumental in exposing major problems within the U.S. military. The intelligence was subpar prior to the invasion, leading to confusion over the campuses of St. George's and finding out information that should have been easily attainable. U.S. forces had to use tourist maps to navigate their way around, which led to fatal mistakes when calling in air support or going on patrol. The invasion also led to the Goldwater-Nichols Act, which helped streamline the military chain of command to make the armed forces more efficient and to cut down confusion between the branches. The invasion is also notable for having been the first use of the UH-60 Blackhawks in combat. For Grenada, the island nation has been a thriving democracy ever since the invasion. Point Saline's International Airport was completed the following year with assistance from the U.S. and began to receive commercial flights. Tourism took off and began to be the biggest draw to the island. St. George's University also remains a big draw for medical students as well. Maurice Bishop remains a highly revered leader in Grenadian history, so much so that in 2009, on what would have been Bishop's 65th birthday, Point Saline's International Airport was renamed in his honor. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you guys learned something today. So in the description, I want to include my schedule for my future videos, which next up is going to be the invasion of Panama, which will be out in 1 to 2 weeks. Also, I will include links to sources, if applicable, or what sources I drew from. So that way, in case you want to do some independent research as well. So, to make sure you don't miss a thing, I hope that you guys hit that subscribe button and leave some comments below about what videos you'd like to see me do in the future. So with that being said, I hope to see you guys on the next video.